everyone, my name is Zyahna Bryant. I'm an activist, organizer, strategist, and content creator. And welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my very first video. It's gonna be a little bit different than what my other videos on this channel will look like, but I'm all about taking my own advice. So today's video, the purpose of it is for me to really tell my story. We are approaching the 5th anniversary of August 12th in Charlottesville. And so on August 12th, 2017, white supremacists took to the streets of Charlottesville and rallied around essentially protecting white supremacy in the form of these precious equestrian statues that sit in public parks in downtown Charlottesville. And as a person who petitioned to take down these statues, and particularly the Robert E. Lee statue in 2016, I thought it was time for me to kind of sit down, reflect on the past 5 years, how my work has changed, how I've evolved as a person, and to tell my own story, because I think I empower, or I try to empower, a lot of people to stand in their truth, stand in their power, and use their voice and their access to different platforms to tell their stories and to tell the stories of other people who have been traditionally left out. And so this time around, I didn't want to tell my story and then have it edited into very controversial sound bites. I didn't want the parts that I always want to be heard the most to be taken out. And so I decided to use my platform, which is my new YouTube channel, to sit down with you guys and to talk about this, to talk about August 12th, to talk about activism, to talk about statues, to talk about being a Black girl in the South. All of these elements are a part of me, are a part of my story, and I'm excited to share them with you. So sit down with me for a short bit and let's talk. Who am I? I think that's such a good question. I think in academia, the undergraduate student in me would say, I am an eco scholar, I go to UVA, I study blah, 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 I work on blah, blah, blah. But I think who I am is so much more than what I produce. And I think I'm challenging myself on my platform and in my real life to kind of decolonize my mind in a way that pushes me to think about what I am beyond what I produce and what I do for institutions. So yes, I am a student. I would like to think of myself as a scholar or someone who is becoming a scholar on my path to doing research, on my path to doing scholarship and learning and engaging in academic discourse. But I also think of myself as a 12-year-old Black girl who was just marching what feels like yesterday for Trayvon Martin, organizing my first protest here in Charlottesville around that issue, police brutality. I think of myself as a young Black girl who's leading the youth choir at my church and participating in Sunday school and Vacation Bible School and the usher ministry and all of those things. I think of myself as a young Black girl who was in that space, just learning how to use my voice. So I think of myself in those ways, but the reality is that now I'm 21. I'm no longer the 15-year-old who petitioned to take down the statues. I'm no longer the 12-year-old who marched for Trayvon Martin. And so I think it's interesting to think about all of those pieces of myself as moments in time, but also as lenses for how I approach the work now. I think that all of those experiences have shaped my organizing experience, my ability to have conversations with people even when it's uncomfortable and even when the topics are tough. But I also think that those experiences have made me into a person who cares deeply about these issues, who's passionate, who's able to link the lived experiences of people who are marginalized to the systems and the institutions that kind of govern or kind of make those realities what they are. And so even in this process of taking down monuments and taking down statues, my goal was always to attack the hidden systems, you know, the systemic issues, the institutional issues. I wanted to talk about the institutional nature of racism. I wanted to talk about the systemic nature of white supremacy. And so I felt like by writing this letter to the editor, this school assignment, and then addressing it to city council and asking them to reconsider what these statues are and why they matter and why they deserve, a space in our public parks, I wanted to use those statues as kind of the tip of the iceberg to then have a deeper conversation about education, about housing, about sustainability, about the wealth gap, about the criminal justice system, which we know has no justice at all for people who look like me. So the industrial prison complex would be a better term for that. I wanted to address all of those things. And so it just happened that I felt like as a young person, I could have the most impact by talking about the statue, and the reaction to it showed me exactly what I needed to see, which is that a lot of people shy away from the tough conversations about racism that need to be had because it is uncomfortable and honestly not polite. And so in a town like Charlottesville, where we are very much so still in the South, still settled in what is the capital, or what was the capital of the Confederacy, and still so close to the heart of this like good old boy mentality and the lost cause narrative, I think that being able to kind of hit where it hurts, attacking these shrines, these pedestals for these generals, was something that allowed me to really have people show their true colors. And when I say their true colors, I think I expected racists to be racist. I expected, white supremacists to hold to their thoughts and their theories and their ideologies. But what I didn't expect was for so many people who looked like me to be afraid, right? Because I don't think that they were just like, oh, I don't care about the statues. I think that that's just the surface level response. But I think beneath that is a fear that white violence will take over again, a fear that there will be another civil war, a fear that there is, this white violence, this white pressure that will essentially make them disappear, for, a lack of better words. And so I think that the process of writing the petition at a very young age allowed me to see the ways that white supremacy reinvents itself in order to meet the current moment, the current conversations, the trends, the mainstream of the time, but also how white supremacy disguises itself in different ways. And so people who I thought I was familiar with, people who I thought because we share, a skin complexion, we also share a politic, those people quickly proved me wrong. And so I think that I started to learn what nuance was. And I started to learn what political disagreements look like within ethnic and racial groups. And so I think in Charlottesville, I expected Black Charlottesville to be 100% behind this removal of the statue. And what, again, I saw was deep wounds of racial trauma that exist here in Charlottesville that had not been addressed. They had not been fixed, repaired. There had been no equity. There had been no reparations to kind of make amends with the communities that had been harmed. And so I saw a deep distrust from a lot of Black people, a lot of underserved communities, a lot of marginalized folks who were just not wanting to engage in public discourse around statues. And I wondered why, but the answer could be because they have bills to pay, because they're close to being evicted, because they're barely making a living wage, if minimum wage. And so, or because half of their family members had been affected by the prison system. And so I started to understand that, yes, there is this piece around prioritizing issues based on your experience and around what affects you on an everyday basis, but also understanding that, again, those statues are connected to all of those issues. And so that was kind of my goal. It was to communicate to people of all walks of life, of all ages, of all backgrounds, that these things are connected. August 12th to me, I think it changes. It feels like it changes every year. I think originally there's this fear of white violence, white terror, as we're watching the events unfold on TV, on Twitter, on our phones, in different chats on August 11th, 2017. I remember just like feeling like I don't know what to do with myself this weekend, but I know that I have to keep myself safe. Being around family, being around friends, being around people who wanted to make sure that I was safe, but also recognizing that, you know, this doesn't go away, right? Like a lot of the actors from August 11th and 12th were, you know, locals, people who had gone to the University of Virginia, a school that I was wanting to attend at the time, hadn't even applied yet, but was in high school and was like, wow, I want to go to UVA. And then knowing that one of the organizers of this rally was, you know, graduated from this university, was something that really made me rethink the way that the narrative was I would say on platforms saying that like, oh, these people are from outside, they're not from Charlottesville. But quickly, a lot of us who are from here, who had been organizing, who had been doing activism work, quickly noticed that no, there are a lot of people here who support this and who are absolutely okay with what's going on. So that was one part. But another part is recognizing the fact that August 12th has become the narrative of what racial violence and what white supremacy looks like in Charlottesville and across the South. But that's just, again, the tip of the iceberg, right? White supremacy does not always come in the form of tiki torches and bats and steel flag poles and things of that nature. It also comes in the form of workplace violence. It comes in the form of horrible tracking policies for students within public education. And so for me on that day, I was worried about the physical violence. But to a lot of people who weren't even deciding to engage with the discourse around August 12th, but who were Black natives of Charlottesville, were saying, look, we're just like we were in the 60s. We're going back in time. And so I felt like, wow, that's such a cliche to say, come out into the streets, come help us. But I had to remember that so many other people had much more pressing concerns than to be fighting toe-to-toe with white supremacists in the streets. And then there's also the piece about Black people being more at risk when they do show up to protests, when they do show up to rallies. People of color are, you know, going to be the people who the police arrest first. They're going to be the people who, you know, these white supremacists want to brutalize the most. So there were just so many different threats to our safety and to our humanity as Black people on August 12th and on August 11th in Charlottesville. I think that over the past 5 years, many people from outside of this space wanted to make the conversation of August 12th about just that day. And I think that's been the most frustrating piece. As a young Black woman who had been on the front lines organizing along with other Black women, I quickly saw our voices and our stories and our experiences as organizers and as activists be erased. And so quickly my goal was no longer to talk about, okay, statues, tiki torches, marches, rallies. I wanted to talk about the perpetual erasure of Black women, the perpetual silencing of Black women in the various different forms of violence that we face. And so as Black women who are organizers in the South, you know, there's so much tea to be spilled around that. But I will say that the misogynoir within these organizing spaces is something that has to be fully eradicated for us to reach true progress, right? We have to be able to take a look within our own communities and say, why are there not enough Black women, clergy or ministers in the pulpit, right? Why are there not enough Black women who have the opportunity to lead large organizations? What is a distrust, and where does the distrust with Black women come from when Black women are the people who always are at the front lines taking to the streets for everyone's life and for everyone's humanity? And the answer is misogyny. The answer is patriarchy. The answer is white supremacy and all of the extensions of such. And so I think August 12th, August 11th, the process of the Blue Ribbon Commission and having conversations about public spaces and statues and the aftermath of all of that, even once the statues have been taken down, has been a constant reflection of me thinking about what does it mean to be someone who does describe themselves as a dark-skinned Black woman who was a fat body, who is, working within the confines of academia in the South. And how do we take note of how all of these systems work together to use my identities against me, and how those oppressions interlock, in the words of Kimberly Crenshaw, and how do we take an approach, or how do we take a lens that helps us to assess the many different directions that violence comes towards me and other Black women who look like me and who do similar work. And that's just me, a young Black girl who's cisgender. But then think about Black women who are trans. Think about non-binary Black folks who are doing this work. And think about all of the violence that comes in their direction. And so that is why my work has shifted from just thinking about public history to using that as a lens to talk about mutual aid, to talk about the direct redistribution of funds, to talk about the direct moving of resources, and to also think about how we can fund Black futures, because we can't just fund some Black futures. We can't just listen to some Black women. We can't just support some Black people. Allyship has to be informed. Allyship has to come from a place of wanting to help all of us. And so that is how I kind of came to this place of wanting to use my platform as a content creator and a social strategist to help people think through their biases. Not so much in a way that I want to just simply and constantly cater to and educate white people, but helping them understand the harm that they're causing. And not just white people, because Black people cause harm too. So thinking about how Black people and other people of color play a role in some of that harm being caused, and how white supremacy, again, is broken down into different facets, and how it repackages and disguises itself in different ways and in different systems to have the same impact and effect of marginalizing and, killing Black people. I wanted to focus on Black girlhood because I am a Black girl. I remember being young and being in a private school and feeling like I was being criminalized simply for existing as a Black girl. And so I felt like as I started to have these aspirations as a first generation college student of going to school and being in academic spaces, I started to feel like there was the expectation, both spoken and unspoken, to whitewash myself, to conform to whiteness completely. And so because of that, I feel like Black girls are constantly told to shrink themselves, told to take up less space, told to be quieter, told to be softer in their approach. And so my goal has always been to kind of push back against that, because we can't say that we want to push back against white supremacy and then still take on the same anti-Black political correctness, or still take on the same anti-Black respectability politics. And so I wanted to celebrate the fullness of Black girls, speak on the fullness of Black girls, and as a Black girl, as a dark-skinned Black girl who comes from a single parent background and who is a first-generation college student, to boldly say that and to name that, because there's power in naming things. And just as there's power in calling white supremacy, and calling racism, there's power in calling anti-Blackness. There's power in calling misogynoir. And so my goal is to always call those things out, but to also offer a space and to offer platforms where Black girls not only feel like they can speak truth to power, but where they can also be fully and authentically themselves. And sometimes that looks like Black girls celebrating their hair, celebrating their skin color, celebrating the things that they like and that they love. And so again, not always existing solely to be in support of whiteness, to like prop up whiteness or to educate whiteness. Like, I want Black girls to feel free in being themselves and not really giving anyone any explanation for doing so. So in this work of elevating Black women and elevating Black girls, I I think I became so passionate about that because my own story of writing the petition to take down the statues, my own story of doing work in my community, I felt like was taken from me. I feel like because I don't fit certain Eurocentric standards of beauty, because I don't fit into certain boxes of being an okay, yes girl, yes man, whatever. I don't agree to all of the very moderate liberal talking points that people don't want to include me in my own story. And so mutual aid quickly came as my way of wanting to continue doing the work. But I simply just was tired of fighting to take ownership over my work. I was simply tired of fighting to tell my story to people who I felt like weren't listening to me. So as Black women do, I adjusted and I said, okay, where can I have impact? And mutual aid was one of those things. When I first heard about mutual aid, it was the beginning of the pandemic. I saw people crowdfunding for folks and I said, wow. What if I could use my platform as it's growing, as I'm doing takeovers for Shawn Mendes and I'm doing takeovers for brands and companies? How can I use this growing platform to actually help the people in my community? And so it started out just me shouting out organizations that were Black led that I felt like needed the resources that I felt like people should be following and paying attention to. And then I recognized that people were asking me specifically, how can I move the resources into the hands of the people who need it the most? And so organically, I started doing these calls to action. I started on Twitter, hey, mutual aid requests, urgent mutual aid requests. This is the amount, this is the person who needs it. This is a brief description of them. Some people were okay with their names being attached. Others wanted to be anonymous. And so mutual aid became a rapid response tool for me to continue doing the work of making sure that, again, we weren't just talking about equity. We weren't just talking about social justice without talking about how we could practically move resources around. So that's where my passion for mutual aid came from. As far as helping Black students who are heading off to college for the first time, as a first-gen student, I wanted to make sure that students had the resources that they needed. And so my goal was to use mutual aid as kind of a method and a platform to help them with their transition, because transitioning into college is expensive. And that is where like the mutual aid for Black college students came from. That is where I've spent a lot of my time over the past year and a half. I would actually say over the past 2 years, just trying to move resources. And I feel like mutual aid it's not charity. And I feel like it's a good way for people who just want to do something quickly, who just want to do without all the talking, without all the theorizing, who just have the access and who want to share some of their privilege. I feel like mutual aid is a great method for that. I have been spending a lot of time thinking about what freedom dreaming means and how I can implement it into my own life. And so to be simple and to be straightforward, my freedom dream is that, you know, people who look like me can exist freely and can have access to all of the things that they need without feeling like they need to beg people for it. And so to me, freedom doesn't exist without the full dismantling of white supremacy. Like, I don't think there can be a freedom until we fully dismantle this idea of the white gaze, because it controls so much of what we do. And so there's no freedom until there is no longer a group of people who have privilege while others do not. But on a smaller scale, on a more immediate scale, I think freedom looks like engaging in community, engaging in radical rest, and being able to take care of myself when I need to. For the past 6 years, I've been known as the girl who wanted to take down statues in Charlottesville. That is the way that people introduce me. That is the way that people look at me, and they don't see me as valuable beyond that. And so my freedom dream would be to kind of change the conversation away from what can we extract out of Black women, what can we extract out of young Black girls, and how can we pour back into them? What do Black girls need? What are the resources that Black women need to flourish? Those are the conversations that are involved in my freedom dream. So on this 5th anniversary of August 12th, as many post their long posts about how they're feeling, as many do their reflections, I want to invite you all to think about what your freedom dream is. I want to invite you to think about how Black futures, how Black people, how Black women and Black girls fit into your freedom dream. Because if your freedom dream only involves yourself, you know, your immediate own perspective, how is that helpful to the allies who may be sitting here reflecting with me and having this conversation with me? If your freedom dream doesn't include sharing your privilege, if it doesn't include being a co-conspirator, because I know some folks don't like to say allies anymore, how are you actually doing anything to push the needle forward? How are you actually doing anything to implement progress? As I always say, and as I've said constantly on panels and talks on platforms since August 12th and even before, is that there can be no unity, there can be no reconciliation without the full redistribution of wealth and resources. There can be no unity without equity. And so I invite you to kind of sit down and reflect on this and think about this, sit with this, because so often we want to move on, we want to kumbaya, we want to have good feelings, we want to wrap anniversaries in a bow, but the reality is that in Charlottesville, everything is still messy. Across the country, everything is still messy. There are still so many open wounds when it comes to racial violence, when it comes to thinking about white supremacy and all of its effects. And so today, as I engage in radical rest, I invite the folks who need to do so. But I also invite the people who have the power to, who have the access to, step up. Step up and do something, because I can tell you now, education isn't free, and this work that we're doing is also not free. And so being able to support that is a privilege. And so I hope that you find the activists, the organizers in your community and in your direct circle, and support them. Be in community with them and show them that you actually want to do the work that you say you want to do, because actions speak much louder than words. Thanks for reflecting with me, and I look forward to seeing y'all in the next video.